de Comunidades Justas. Hi, my name is Simone Rivadeneira, and I'm an interpreter from the Just Communities Language Justice Network. Voy a proveer interpretación simultánea de inglés al español para el evento de esta noche. I will be providing simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish for tonight's event. Algunas guías para trabajar con intérprete. A few guidelines when working with an interpreter. Por favor, hablar a un paso moderado. Esta es la señal para que hablen más despacio. Please speak at a moderate pace. This is the sign if we need you to slow down. Por favor, de hablar en una voz alta y clara. Esta es la señal para que hablen más fuerte. Please speak in a loud, clear voice. This is the sign to speak up. Por favor, hablar solamente uno a la vez. Please only speak one at a time. Al final del evento, por favor, regresen sus aparatos a la mesa en donde se los dieron. At the end of the event, if you took equipment, please return it to the back table over there. Gracias. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome. My name is Rebecca August. I live between Los Alamos and Buellton. And I've been in the area for about 20 years, just for context's sake. I didn't know when I bought my house that there was oil development back behind it. And I didn't know, had I thought it was just a pump jack, I don't know if I would have been really concerned, but when I found out that they were injecting oil waste into the aquifer in violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act, I got really concerned. My family and my animals, we all rely on our well water. Just like most of the people in this room. And if it got contaminated, we would not be able to live there anymore. I think that people in the city and hedge fund investors and Americans in general think that oil comes from the middle of nowhere. Actually, ERA sent a letter out, and in the letter they said that no one lives out here. Well, clearly people live out here. I walked around this town quite a bit and talked to some of the neighbors here. And I can tell you that these people, you all care about your water and your kids and your air just as much as I do. So if we don't advocate for our own water and our own health, nobody else is going to. So that's why I started a group called Safe Energy Now. It's Safe Energy Now North County, and we're a bunch of residents from Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, Orchid, and Los Alamos. We're working to stop unsafe oil operations and to encourage safer renewable energy. And I'm here to represent Ben as your moderator. Thanks so much for being here. I know it's kind of hard to get out in the evening. We have coffee. It's unfortunately all caffeinated, so if you prefer decaf, you might want to just abstain. There's cookies too, they're pretty good, they're locally made. I want to thank also Benjamin Foxen Elementary School for the use of the space. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I talking? I'm not very good with microphones. Is it okay? Okay. I also want to thank Just Communities for their translation services. The reason that why we're here tonight is to talk about 3 big oil projects that are proposed for this area. There are 750 plus wells, they go through the Santa Maria Aquifer. They're going to triple Santa Barbara County oil production, and they're happening right here in our backyard. So for some context about the way that we're going to run this meeting, you've heard from the oil companies. I've heard from the oil companies. I've seen the ads. I've gotten letters. I've met them out in all the different street fairs that we have. And I know they're hosting barbecues. There's all kinds of ways to meet the oil companies and to find out about what they want you to know about their projects, which is really important. They're a local business. Well, they're a business. It's important to know what they want you to know about what they're doing. They have a lot invested in drilling these wells and making sure that they get drilled. So we're not here to debate oil or imported oil or plastic or anything like that. We're here to talk about these projects and how they're going to affect us here. This is your opportunity to hear from people whose primary concern is the impact this massive expansion is going to have on our environment on our health and on our communities. We have 4 speakers. They're professionals and experts in their field. They're familiar with these projects. Some of them have been studying them for years. They're here to present you with some information. You're going to have the opportunity to ask questions afterwards. There's some index cards that should be around. If you have a question, write it on the index card so you don't forget, and someone will pick them up at the end, and then we'll read them and answer them. And then, you can take home all the information that you have tonight and talk with your families, talk with your friends, make the decision what you think, about what's happening. We just want to make sure that you have all the information that's available. So, if anybody needs to get closer, if you need to see, this is where most of the action is going to be happening. We have 4 speakers. First, we're going to have Katie Davis. She's with us from the Sierra Club Los Padres chapter. She's been looking at these projects for quite some time. She has a lot of technical information. She's going to give us an overview about what's going to happen. Alicia Rossler is also here. She's a lawyer from the Environmental Defense Center. She's reviewed all of the environmental impact reports that have come out about these projects, and also other ones about other projects all over that have happened in the county. She's really great at what she does, and so she's going to talk to us about the environmental impacts. And then we have Dr. Kevin Beckman. He's a family physician practicing in this area locally for 19 years. He's going to talk about the general health impacts of oil expansion and these kinds of drilling. And then we have Ana Rosa Rizzo Centino. Did I say it right? Thank you. Sorry, I'm terrible. So she's here with us from Food and Water Watch, and she's going to talk about the environmental justice issues with these projects. So I won't take any more of your time. We can get started. Everybody's just going to talk for about 5 or 6 minutes. So we're trying to conserve your time, and then we'll have questions after. So thank you.
I'm Katie Davis, and I just want to do a quick overview of what these projects are. So if we could go to the first slide. So there's 3 projects that are all in close proximity to each other. I'm going to get up so I can see these slides a little bit better. So that's the total, all of them together gets to the 760 wells. And that would triple onshore oil production in Santa Barbara County. So what we want to emphasize is how large all these combined projects are, that this could essentially turn into one of the largest oil fields in California. So we're faced with this decision about, are we going to go down this road and be, a Kern County here, or maintain this rural character of this area. So the 3 companies are ERG. ERG is currently in bankruptcy, so it's unclear who would be operating these. They're for sale. And they owe their contractors money, they owe taxes, and they're currently operating here. So there's some risk there. If they had some kind of problem, they wouldn't be able to cover it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind about ERG. ERA is, you'll see a lot of their PR and their materials. They have more money and more professional time because they're owned by Exxon and Shell. So they're a California-based company, but it's owned by Exxon and Shell, and they're going back to an old Exxon field that's been shut down for more than 20 years, and all the conventional oil's gone, and they're going back to get more enhanced, this hard-to-get access heavy oil. And they will admit that they're a California-only limited liability company that is allowed to take risks that their parent companies wouldn't take. And they will tell you that, because they told me that. They're proud of it. And PetroRock is a company that owned by the Hunter family of the Hunter Resources that ran the Casamigos toxic waste dump. So that's their background. So that's the 3 projects. ERA is they're going to be giving out money and looking like they're a great community supporter, but it pales in comparison to the $40 million they've spent lobbying in Sacramento. So that's an important thing to keep in mind too, about who's regulating these people right now and what kind of oversight we have. So go to the next slide. So it's all enhanced oil recovery. So it's all, it's not your traditional conventional drilling, it's cyclic steam injection and steam flooding. If you go quickly, just the difference between those 2 operations. Cyclic steam is one well, extreme heat and heat to get the oil to make it melt this very heavy oil in the ground, and then it comes out of the same
well, only it can be horizontal too. Next one. And then steam flooding, the difference is it's one well to put the steam in, another to pull it out. The important thing to keep in mind, you can go to the next slide, is all of them have these large natural gas pipelines associated with their projects too, and they're not little, they're 8 inches, they're pretty big, because it takes a tremendous amount of natural gas to actually heat that earth up to 500 degrees to melt that heavy oil on the ground. So it's a tremendous amount of fossil fuels used to access more fossil fuels. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. That's why the air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions are much higher for these projects than for conventional drilling. They also do use acidizing, and this involves injecting acids and other chemicals underground into the wells, including hydrofluoric acid, which is actually a component of chemical weapons. It's extremely poisonous and toxic material, and the concentrations in acidizing can be higher than in fracking fluids. So there are some toxic chemicals that are used. There's also naturally occurring poisons that come out, like hydrogen sulfide. We have very sour gas, high hydrogen sulfide content, and that's also very toxic and poisonous. Okay, next. They'll say that we're not using fresh water for production, but they say production because they use a tremendous amount of fresh water to drill each of these wells and to keep the dust down and other things. So each of these projects uses 7 or 8 million gallons of fresh water annually. And as Rebecca pointed out, this area, we rely on our local groundwater for drinking water and agriculture. So the real risk here is putting that really precious groundwater at risk, both because they're using it and also because of potential contamination, because they would all drill through the groundwater aquifer. They all expect spills. It's just a matter of how big they are. So in ERG's environmental document, they expect they're going to have 18 spills over 10 years. We're going to have 18 spills over every 10 years. It's just a matter of how big they are and how much they can contaminate. And the other important point is that parts of this area are in the very top percentile in terms of groundwater threats. 99th percentile meaning the very worst in terms of the threat to our groundwater. So we're very concerned about that. And then there's going to be a ton of truck traffic associated with these projects too. So they have hundreds of trucks, each of them. So if you total it up, Petro-Rock daily trips, so that includes automobiles potentially too, but the others are actual trucks. That's almost 700 daily trips. So you have trucks and tankers coming all the time, every day, and they have to actually truck light oil in to mix with this heavy oil and then truck it all back out again. So that's why there's so many trucks associated with this. And then the trucks are just a very dangerous way of transporting oil. And also because you have those natural gas pipelines and there's parts where they go along the 101 and under the 135, there is a risk of, if a natural gas gets out, it could be ignited by cars and you can have an explosion. And that's happened in California and it's highlighted as a risk in these projects too. So it's an immense amount of natural gas. It's actually more natural gas than is used in our residences. So don't think of a little natural, it's a lot of gas. Okay, next slide. And then these operations are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So they're operating at night. They're 1,900 feet away from this elementary school, 1,300 feet away from the nearest residence. So they're very close to where people live. And you'll hear them because it's identified again in the environmental reports as noise is a significant impact. And that can really impact kids' ability to learn and concentrate and just that sort of thing. And then there's constant noise from traffic as well. So next. And then lastly, we have a tremendous amount of grading that needs to take place with these projects. So AIR, for instance, would bulldoze 300 acres, or 3 million cubic feet of earth is being moved, and removal of up to 1,500 oak trees. I've heard between 500 and 1,500 mature oak trees. So if you think about it, 1 acre is about a football field. So think about 300 football fields of bulldozed for one project. So it's an immense amount. They're saying we're going to have nature reserve and plant new oak trees. Well, they have to plant new oak trees to make up for these ones, but you can't really replace a mature oak tree because you have to constantly water it. It's not the same as these mature oak trees that have been there now for decades. Pedro Rock, currently their soil is already contaminated and they're having to remediate it. So, and this is before they've done this massive expansion. Okay, I think that's it. This is the timeline of where we are in this process. All projects are kind of backed up. Right now, ERG is at the head. It's had their draft environmental impact reports come out. The next step is it goes to the County Planning Commission for a decision. So that's our opportunity to raise these concerns and say the benefits of these projects do not outweigh the risk. And we really think they don't, particularly with all of them. So they will come up either, it's possibly in December, but more likely in January. So that's kind of, look for that one at the County Planning Commission. And if you sign in, we'll let you know when these happen. And then Air's behind that, we're expecting their environmental report any moment now. So we'll know more information about that one. And then Pedro Rock's behind that. And once they go through the Planning Commission, depending on how they decide, it can get appealed to the county supervisors. And so then they make usually a final determination about these projects. So that's a process. And good, because I'm done. Thank you. Alicia. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alicia Rossler, a staff attorney for the Environmental Defense Center. Can everyone hear me okay? That's better, okay. I'm just going to go over, after Katie's overview, to speak to some of the specific environmental impacts. So far, we do have some more detailed information on specific projects, so I'll go over that first. ERG's project did release the draft environmental impact report. The other two projects, ERA and Petro Rock, are still in the process. We're waiting for those EIRs, so we have a little more limited information on that. So a lot of these impacts that I will be discussing highlight ERG's project, and that's pretty much just because we have more information about it. So I just wanted to let you know about that first. And hopefully this will work here. So I think the big question, hopefully, that many of you came here tonight to find out is, how will 760 new wells affect me? So some of the impacts that I'm going to go over briefly tonight, and please feel free to ask questions about any other impacts you have questions about later in Q&A. So how will these wells affect our community and our environment specifically? They will deplete local groundwater resources, degrade our air, threaten water quality, and contaminate our local aquifer, putting our safety at risk by adding tanker trucks on our local roads, and there will be massive native habitat destruction, not creation. Next. So one of the first impacts I'd like to speak to is the increased air pollution impacts that affect our climate and our health and our quality of life. Extracting oil by using this steam deep underground requires a significant amount of energy. This is what makes it so risky and so intense and so dirty, as you've seen some of the ads, compared to other conventional extraction techniques. The result of this is higher greenhouse gas, higher climate change impacts. Cat Canyon, when you look at the life cycle and you take into account thermal production, is actually among the top 10% of carbon-intense oil operations in the world. And this is pretty significant to think about. Even if you support oil and you think that's the wave of our future, we should be doing it in a responsible manner, not in the most carbon-intense way that makes a few oil companies money and makes the community bear the burden of the impacts. One of the impacts you probably noticed in the community already living here is particulate matter, which is dust. All of these projects combined are going to be kicking up a significant amount of dust on a daily basis during construction, which does not just last a few years, there's constant oil drilling 24 hours a day. These are long construction periods of time, particularly when you take into account all three of these projects together. And as mentioned earlier, don't be fooled. A lot of the PR on these projects says, we don't use fresh water for steaming. And that may be true. However, there's a significant amount of fresh water that will be required in order to drill. And the drilling comes from drilling each of these oil wells. When the oil wells actually either fail or they need to be re-drilled because there's no more oil at the bottom, then they will drill a new replacement oil well, which is why there is constant oil drilling going on at all times. And every time they drill a well, they need fresh water in order to mix with the drilling muds and to finish the drilling and completion of that well. And in this particular climate, given that this is in the Santa Maria groundwater basin, competition for water is steep. And so this is something that every one of us that lives in this county, whether you're north or south, rely on groundwater. And some of the North County towns, particularly Gary and Sisquoc, rely solely on groundwater. So keeping your groundwater healthy, safe, and protected, I'm sure is in the front of all of our minds here, and keeping it from happening what's happened in Kern County. Perfect. So as I mentioned before, the Santa Maria groundwater basin underlies and is the source of drinking water for several of our communities. Some of the means we'll speak about specifically is how in that basin, I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide, please. This is a better picture so that you can actually see where the wells are drilled and how they actually go through the aquifer. You can see the big blue there. Aquifer contamination can happen through drilling, through the aquifer when there's a well casing failure. That's the concrete lining of the well. There have been documented breaches already. There are also failures and upwellings that can occur. So even though there could be a space between the oil and the aquifer, when you steam and overpressure and fracture over years and years and years, and these fields have a lot of abandoned and old wells, then what you can create is a system where you have a lot of pressure that pushes the oil up into the aquifer as well. So it's not a matter of just having the oil well leak or breach that happens to be going through the aquifer and drinking water. It's also a matter of having it upwell into the aquifer. Also, as many of you may know or not, there's also a significant amount of produced wastewater, toxic wastewater, when this oil is pulled up. Far more, there are many, many, many gallons of produced water with every gallon of oil that they pull up in this method. And that produced water they use acid, acidizing chemicals, and a lot of other toxic and hazardous chemicals. And that produced water has to be disposed of. And one of the ways that's the most economical for an oil company to dispose the water is to inject it right back into the ground. There is an incredibly high density of disposal wells in this particular area. And so that's another way that the aquifer can be contaminated. And oil spills do happen. You know, for example, for ERG, from 2011 to 2015, ERG was responsible for 21 oil spills that released over 20,000 gallons of crude. They're one of the top 3 operators in the county with the highest number of oil spill and or volume in the county. This is significant. ERG, along with a couple of the other companies, were also illegally injecting this wastewater into your aquifer as well. And that's been another issue that is a whole other process for you to communicate and comment on that's being reviewed by the Water Board and the EPA. And just briefly touch on the significant amount of trucks in this area. As Katie mentioned earlier, there will be several hundred trucks passing along these roads. For those of you that are parents, I'm a parent, I have 2 children. I know if there were on the order of 2 or 3 or even 50 tanker trucks that I might be traveling with my children on the way to school, I would be concerned. I'm concerned about how many hundreds of tanker trucks will be traveling on these local roads when you look at the stats for tanker truck accidents. I'm sure several of you may be aware of, there was a recent accident with a tanker truck where a 9-year-old little boy was killed for a collision with an SUV. There are statistics, 61% of all fatal crashes involving large trucks occur in rural areas on rural roads, just like Foxen Canyon and Dominion, where these trucks will be traveling. Next, thank you. And as I mentioned before, there's a significant amount of habitat destruction. I won't go over all the acreages and over 1,500 oak trees that will be destroyed, but as many of you know from living here, you drive by the oil fields, there are pockets of development, and there are acres and acres of native habitat in wildlife that deserves to be protected. This is one little example of the western spadefoot toad. For example, in ERG's draft environmental impact report, over 65 special status wildlife species have a high potential to occur on site. That's a significant number. I've been reviewing EIRs and a CEQA attorney at the Environmental Defense Center for decades of my career, and it is very rare to see a project that has such a high biodiversity, particularly of rare and native species. So there's a couple of them, American badgers and the state's website. And I'll wrap it up now and turn it over to Dr. Beckman to speak to some of the health impacts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Beckman. A lot of you look familiar. I worked in Santa Maria for Marion Hospital in the emergency room from 2000 to 2010. So if any of you were there on a Sunday or a Tuesday, you might have run into me. The last time I gave this talk, I had to go to the hospital before, in Cottage Hospital, and I had these two patients, and one was like in his late 70s, heavy smoker, had double pneumonia, influenza, bacterial pneumonia, and the other guy was about 62, and he'd smoked a little bit, had pneumonia, influenza negative, really sick. I was sending him to surgery that day because the pneumonia had gone through his lung and into the lining of his lung, and it needed to be done. And so I was trying to figure out what's the difference here. And no, he was not an oil field worker, but the gentleman who was sicker had worked as a printer and had a lot of exposure to a chemical called toluene, which is used in ink to dry it when you print it. And he had inhaled a lot of that and caused significant lung damage to himself, and as a result was quite a bit sicker than the person you would have thought would have been sick with the bad emphysema. So, can I have the next slide, please? The purpose of this, of what I'm going to try and do, is kind of say, oh, well, we know these things are bad. Kind of why are they bad for us, and how they affect our health. And this is a bibliography from the sources that I used to put this talk together, and it's available if anybody wants it. I'm happy to share it. Can I have the next slide, please? So, on a cellular level and on a biochemical level, these chemicals that are used to make gasoline and oil products can do three things. And one is they disrupt cellular membranes. They can act as hormone and affect hormone receptors and cellular function, and they can also destroy our DNA and cause mutations in them. So this is a cell membrane, what it kind of looks like, and it forms a bubble, and if you can imagine, there's a fatty part and a water part, and there's these mechanisms in there that help the cell remain whole, and what'll happen is that the chemicals will come in and they'll dissolve part of this makeup here, or like hydrogen sulfide will denature these proteins and put these holes in these cell membranes so that fluid just rushes in and explodes the cell, and so you have instant cell death. And so people who are exposed and get burns on there, have all this cellular death, or have liver toxicity from it, their liver cells will be exploding from this type of damage. So that's one way. Can I have the next slide, please? Also, here's the cell membrane again, and in the cell membrane are these receptors, and there's tons of receptors on there, and the hormones come in and they fit like a lock and a key into these receptors, and then they turn it on and they change the way the cell produces. Can I have the next slide? So a hormone normally comes in, binds here, goes, talks to the DNA, and then does what it wants to do. A pollutant that acts like a steroid will turn this on, come here, which is not good if you're a child and you haven't gone through puberty and all of a sudden you're 7 and going through puberty, or let's say you're a breast cell and you've had a little DNA mutation and this is acting like estrogen and driving this DNA, and that's how somebody develops breast cancer. Happens in the prostate too, so this will be testosterone. Next slide, please. And then they can get into our DNA. This is normal DNA. Two helixes come through. Next slide. You take a little benzene, and it goes through there like a throwing star. Just rips it apart. Radioactivity does that too. And then this will try and reform, and it'll put itself together. If the cell lives, the cell may die, but if the cell lives, then you'll have a mutated DNA, and then you'll have a setup for a cancer cell. It's in the right place. Get the next slide, please. Just kind of read that. So we only know a certain amount of chemicals that are used in these acidization processes and so forth. It's like the tar you get in your sand at the beach or something. It's really hard, kind of chunky stuff, and so they melt it and they dissolve it in these chemicals that dissolve our cells too. And we don't really know what's out there. And you can see the EAPS only tests things when there's evidence of harm. So there's a lot of stuff they're using that we don't know what's out there. You can't have a accident at the hospital and figure out what it is because it's a secret sauce that they're using. So these are some of the things used. They're benzene, toluene, xylene, isotopes. They're solvents. They make the oil thinner so that they run. Toluene, we discussed that gentleman with pneumonia and the empyema, he breathed a lot of toluene in. Oh, so the picture looks like here when I drive here. And then something. I'll give this one a second to go in. So benzene's very common in gasoline and this sort of thing. So there's no safe level of benzene. Benzene goes in, breaks up the DNA. It goes right through the cell membranes, takes everything out. Next slide, please. So this one caught my eye. I mean, it looked at Colorado near where they were doing the fracking actually, which is different. They have to break up the soil and we don't have to because we have plate tectonics here. But the 10-mile radius, lower burst weight of an oil field, 30% increase in congenital heart defects, lower IQ, 100% increase in neural tube defects in the most exposed groups of people who are living right around there that had a bunch of neural tube defects. And what is that? What is a neural tube defect? Can I have the next slide, please? So, spina bifida, anencephaly, some sort of thing. Early, within 21 days of conception, before someone even really knows they're pregnant generally, this is occurring in the body, and the embryo's gone from a flat disc and kind of curls around into a tube or a worm and forms the structure. And if the benzene gets into the body, and benzene is very soluble and easy to go into the body, it will disrupt this folding process, and children will be born with these birth defects. 100%. I would say if you are trying to get pregnant, you need to stay away from getting your car filled up with gas. Stay out away from oil fields for sure. Another paper just to look at, in 2014. They have like estrogen, testosterone, thyroid, cortisone, progesterone, and we know that we saw that they caused this hormonal disruption. That's the paper cited there. Slide. Cancer, leukemia, and lymphoma, men living near these places. Bladder cancer, which we know comes from people who work with these chemicals already, especially smokers. Particulate matter, we were talking about that earlier, Katie was talking about that earlier. The big particulate matter, the 100 micron particles, although we get in our eyes and our nose, are bad. The PM 2.5 particles here are the little ones, 2.5 microns, that we breathe in. This stuff from burning, flaring off, and the trucks, and diesel consumption and whatnot. And those we actually can take and breathe into our lungs so that they cross into the alveoli and then they go into the body. And we know we've seen from those exposure to the PM 2.5 particles, heart, lung disease, dementia, birth defects, everything. It gets in. Prefrontal cortex are sensitive, you know. I have some theories about that. Interesting. Really can see that it has affected school performance and attendance, being exposed to these particles. Next slide, please. Methane is another thing. It's what natural gas is, basically. Toxic, chemical. You can die from breathing too much, and global warming, all that stuff. Next slide, please. Hydrogen sulfide is another thing that comes off from this off-gassing. You can see the air. You see that the more you get, the worse it is. To shock, convulsions, coma, death. If you're really exposed to hydrogen sulfide, it's very common around here, as Katie said. We didn't talk beforehand, so it's a real thing. Next please. We know that with the oil industry and oil industry jobs come stress, noise, traffic, STDs increase, bigger habitat. Next slide, please. And then, this was looking at we hear, oh, the oil company moves in and we're going to get all these great jobs. And if you look here, 1,300 U.S. oil field workers died between 2008 and 2014. About 1,800 U.S. soldiers died in Afghanistan during the same time. So I'm glad that it's safer to work in an oil field than to be at war in Afghanistan. I really am. But not that much. It's not that much safer. So high amount of injuries when I was working down in Marion. Some of the kids were so cavalier about coming in with, I don't know if you've seen hats with a hand with a finger missing because of such a common injury in the oil fields to lose a finger, kind of thinking of it as a rite of passage. And I had a hard time with that one. I really did. And I know more about benzene. Anyways, I think that's my talk. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, y'all. I had one more, just to remind everybody, if you have questions, to write them on the cards and maybe pass them to the end of the end so that folks in the back can pick them up from you, and then we'll be able to read them off afterwards in a seamless way.
Hi everyone, good evening. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. Again, my name is Ana Rosa Rezo-Centino, and I'm Senior Organizer for Food and Water Watch in Santa Barbara County. I want to talk about how important it is the science behind everything you just heard, but I also want to add some numbers. So the reason why we had this here is because your children and your grandchildren will be most affected by these projects. And if you look at Benjamin Foxen Elementary School specifically, 64% of students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Only 32% are proficient in math. Only 42% are proficient in reading. 64% are students of color. 49% are Latino. So, you know, I've been an organizer for 20 years, and I've organized not only locally, but statewide and nationally. And it's not an accident that everywhere I go, corporations seem to always pick low-income communities to create their most harmful projects, because they think they can buy us off. And I'm sorry, but my health, my child's health is priceless. It's hard for me to talk about, but I actually lost my first baby at 3 days old due to a health issue. And it's hard for me to imagine that anyone would choose to support projects that would put their children at more health risk, knowing that that is a reality. No matter what amount of money they gave me, my child's health is worth much more than that. So I just want to make a call to action to everyone that's here tonight, that this is more important than anything that you can think of. Our children's health, the next generation, that's what we're here for, right? To create a brighter future for them. Otherwise, what's the point of all this, right? And so I just want to ask you all to let your supervisors know, the County Board of Supervisors know that you oppose these projects, that the air that we breathe is not for sale, the water that we drink is not for sale. So please come to me and let me know that you'd like to get active on these issues, and I'm happy to work with you so that we can make sure that these projects do not get built. Thank you.
So Jonathan from Sierra Club is going to walk around with some things to sign if you want to take a look at those. So I have some questions here. This one says, would you address the diesel particulate matter impacts from project, especially close to the school, from trucks, steam generators?
Okay, I didn't know if we were that's a little bit better. In terms of the diesel particulate matter, like I said, we've had only one project really has their numbers out, and that's still in the very beginning stages of environmental review, and that's ERGs. We do know that there will be several hundred trucks that will be going on roads near the school, at least from ERG's project. In terms of the other projects, we're still waiting to see exactly what the trucking routes are. But there are trucks coming in to bring light crude oil to Vic's with Cat Canyon's oil, and there'll be trucks coming out. In terms of the impacts, I know for ERG's project, in terms of particulate matter, this area is already in violation of the state's maximum safe level for particulate matter. So that's pretty significant in and of itself. Anything on top of that is just adding to the further degradation and more dust and health effects that you're going to have from that. In terms of the steam generators, those also release a significant amount of air pollution. And that is something we're still getting information on in terms of how many steam generators are required and actually getting a full accounting of the emissions. There was a lot of information missing from ERG's environmental impact report, so much so that when we submitted our 150-page letter detailing all that was missing, that we asked the county to go back and do it again and recirculate it. So we're hoping that they do the right thing and that happens. So we will be able to fill you in on more information on those particular issues. I don't know if you want to talk about one health impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to note about diesel in particular is it causes cancer. So 70% of the air pollution that's carcinogenic, that causes cancer, comes from diesel in particular. The diesel is particularly bad. Some of the projects like Eric is talking about, oh, we'll have natural gas trucks, which is, they're still trucks, and also natural gas is highly explosive, so you're trading one problem for another.
It creates those particles I was talking about, oxygen sulfide gas, and the things I was going through are a direct result of burning fossil fuels and being exposed to these chemicals.
Tell us about how local runoff from oil well pads spilled at ground level can contaminate groundwater from above. That make sense? So tell us about how local runoff from oil well pads and spills at ground level can contaminate our groundwater from above.
Right, so the spills can get into the streams, they can percolate down through, I mean, our groundwater comes from rain, so it percolates down through to the groundwater. So spills are a major source of potential groundwater contamination, and we talked about the amount of spills, there's just sort of a part of doing business. Yeah, no, I mean, you can absolutely have a risk to groundwater from above.
Have there been releases of oil into the Santa Maria groundwater basin?
We have been reviewing and doing Public Records Act requests to several of the state agencies that regulate the underground oil, which is the Department of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources. There have been documented spills and breaches into the aquifers. When we get further in the process, we will be presenting all of that information at the public hearings, but there absolutely have been spills by ERG and Vaquero in Santa Barbara County.
You know, Ken, when you was mentioning one that's coming up, there's a potential issue right now. So I don't know if you wanted to give me information about it, but yes, there's spills in that.
Yeah. Why do the projects need to truck in oil?
It's because it's this really heavy oil. It's so thick they can't even it won't flow. So they're getting this light oil to water it down basically.
Does steaming increase the risk of accidents? Is it safe?
Cyclic steam injection has particularly high rates of well casing failure compared to other ones. Because of the high heat and intensity, it causes more of those kinds of accidents than others. Sorry.
And it's absolutely accurate, and depending if you're doing steam flooding and you have to drill an additional well, that also can become an issue if you're dealing with a repurposed or reworked well that has not been adequately, built back up again and reused. Sometimes they convert a conventional oil well to a different type of well using thermal processes as well for extraction. All of those combined with a very old oil well that already has a lot of abandoned wells mixed in, that's affected the underground integrity. It really all lends to that risky oil operation for thermal.
I had one other point actually. It can also actually fracture the bedrock. So this happened in Canada up at there's this Cold Lake oil field, and they do cyclic steaming up there too. They do that with tar sands because it's also this heavy oil. And it actually fractured this rock, and then it was just spilling, and they couldn't stop it because it was underground. And so this whole lake and groundwater area got massively contaminated in Canada. And it's the same it was the same process. It was cyclic steam injection.
A local example of oversteaming was by Pacific Coast Energy Company. They were actually had to cease their operations in particular areas of the oil field because they had oversteamed to such a degree that it had caused massive landslides on their oil field and created dangerous conditions. In addition to several oil seeps over 100 of them.
Or did I just ask that to Steve and Chris? Are these projects using directional drilling?
Yeah, that means horizontal underground, like parallel to the ground, rather than just straight down. And yes, there are references to directional drilling in a number of these projects. So it's unclear exactly where they're going. You didn't do a map of that. That's another thing that we asked for. So hopefully we'll have more information about that in future environmental reports.
Do the EIRs address alternate projects, especially since none of these projects have any benefits but seem to have all the risks?
You know, that's an interesting question because a number of people asked, well, what about a renewable energy project? And the EIR for ERG, just the environmental report, just totally dismissed that out of the hand. They said, well, this is an oil project, so we can't consider other projects. And we can't, it would take like 1,000 acres of solar to create enough energy to get the oil out of the ground, which is amazing if you think about it, because that's like a power plant, 1,000 acres. And so it's just a tremendous amount of energy used to extract the energy. We might as well just use those solar panels or that natural gas to just power our houses and our cars directly. We could power more electric cars than all that gasoline could. So that's interesting. They were really but they just addressed the oil projects. But there are, if you don't do this, I mean, there are other potential uses of this land. And that's the thing, if you have an oil economy, you don't get other kinds of development. You're not going to get, it puts at risk a whole agricultural economy, which is the #1 industry. Like 25,000 people are employed in Santa Barbara County in agriculture. And this puts those at risk. And it also discourages tourism. It discourages other kinds of development that you might have. So that is another really important point to keep in mind about some of the downsides of these projects.
If they truck light oil from Kern County, will they be using Highway 166 and Tepesquay Canyon Road? Tepesquay Canyon Road would be a high-risk route for this.
Right. Like I said, there's only been one EIR released to date. So in terms of the truck routes, we have from that particular one, but we're waiting for the other two. We just have a couple applications out. So hopefully we'll have more information on the truck routes between Kern and here. So stay tuned, and if you check on our different websites, we'll definitely be posting more information on that.
This one's just for you. Ms. Rossler at EDC, can you clarify and add color to the 99th percentile groundwater risk point? There's actually an A and a B, so that's the A part.
Right. Sure. The 99th percentile groundwater risk is actually from a state agency that collects data on communities to assess and rank communities that are vulnerable to pollution and are overburdened by pollution. And so it's called like CalEnviro data. And you can access that. It was actually referenced in a comment letter that we submitted on the ERG project so far. So with the 99th percentile mean rapid groundwater risk, it means, for example, in this particular instance, that this community has already faced so many numbers of groundwater cleanups that they are at the 99th percentile for risk compared to others. So out of 100 communities, then 99 other communities have far less groundwater risk than this one, if that makes sense.
Has there been a review of the fresh groundwater impact from the needed volumes for these 750 wells? Does the offset of this come into play with Sigma or the Santa Maria Basin at large?
This is an excellent question. As I mentioned before, we only have ERG's environmental impact report out to date, and there really was not an adequate analysis in many aspects for that particular project. Particularly, one of the things we asked for was what is the real draw, because particularly for ERG, it was not disclosed how much fresh water would be required for that particular project. Even the county was unaware, and we have documentation of correspondence with the county where they had failed to ask the question and had failed to gather that particular information. So we hope to get that information. It is something that should be part of the assessment, and it needs to be compared. All three of these projects need to have what we call a cumulative impact analysis of the groundwater draw and compared to the resource for the basin. I know there's an adjudication. This is an adjudicated basin, which means there's a lawsuit going on right now, and several oil companies are part of that adjudication, trying to get their fair share of fresh water for these projects and other projects as well. So it's something we hope to see in the environmental analyses, and it's an excellent question that the community has a right to know.
Oil companies say that current wells are very safe and protect groundwater. Are the older wells still going to be used?
Yeah, I mean, it's in their interest to say it's completely safe, but we see these new operations and the impacts, and there are spills. You look at the environmental report, it says we project 18 spills every 10 years. Like, that's more than one spill a year, like 2 spills a year. So you can't do this. You just can't drill for oil without some risk. And anyone that tells you that you can is not telling you the truth. It's just inherently a risky industry, and that's just a fact. And then yes, there are these old wells. Actually increases the risk because there are these holes down there that could potentially, you add new steam and pressure, you could potentially cause those to spill when they hadn't been, because not all of them were adequately capped. So yeah, the old wells down there, they used to not do a terrible job of capping them, but that just increases the new risk of these new wells. So there is no way to do this that's completely safe. There just isn't.
SLO County has Measure G to stop these projects. Why doesn't our county do that?
There was an attempt actually in 2014, and that measure didn't pass. The oil company spent $8 million saying that this was going to, it was not, this was terrible, it was going to stop all oil drilling, and the county would have no money. It wasn't true. The oil doesn't pay anything to the county except property taxes. It's hard. The county spends a lot of money just collecting the property taxes. It makes up 1% of the county budget, so of the revenue they get. So yes, the oil companies are some of the biggest property taxpayers in the county, but there are very few of them. So if you add up all the hundreds of thousands of the rest of us, it's homeowners that pay the majority of property taxes. Anyway. So that was that. It is really interesting to see more and more counties are stepping forward and banning these processes, and it goes to show how alarmed people are and how they see that this is not the future. We don't need to go this route in California. San Luis Obispo is voting on it. Monterey already passed one. Santa Cruz, San Benito. So a bunch of counties. We maybe end up the one that's got everything, because these are massive increases proposed here. And we don't need it. I mean, they say, well, we have to drill here, or it's just all going to be imported. It's not true. Actually, California oil use is going down. It's been relatively flat for over 20 years, even though our GDP's grown, our economy's grown, our population's grown, and we're not using more gas. In fact, we used like 4 million gallons a day less last year than we did in 2006. We're on track to get to this 5 million electric car goal in the state. We don't need more oil. We're now, the U.S. is now the #1 producer in the world, and we're exporting oil. So we don't need it. Maybe in the future we could look at another actual initiative, but that's not on the table right now. Right now we've got projects that we need to fight one by one. Sorry.
Jobs. It says in big letters, jobs. Who will the workers be? Will they be from our community? Will they live here?
My understanding is that most of the jobs are temporary jobs, and I think that's why it's important that we talk about this. It's like, it's not just about jobs, it's about the quality of jobs. Are they permanent jobs? And still, like I said before, even if it were, our health is not worth it.
And yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit. In terms of, this is an argument that is often used. This came up when Pacific Coast Energy Company's project was defeated 2 years ago. And in terms of the number of jobs, they are often temporary construction jobs, and the high-paying jobs, the really solid jobs, you might not be as exposed to many health impacts, are usually people that are moved from other headquarters in Texas or somewhere else, and they circulate some of the same executives and folks. So it's just something to keep in mind, that's one of the benefits they always cite, but it is so small in comparison to the impacts.
And also the same people that are promoting these projects are going out and speaking against the wind energy project that's also planned nearby. And they're speaking against these community choice energy programs that allow local investment in clean energy jobs and produce way more jobs than are in the oil industry. There's more people employed in the renewable energy sector than in fossil fuels in the entire US, and a lot more in California. There's a lot more opportunity for growth in those areas. And those get, if you have the oil companies in charge, you don't get those other jobs because they don't like the competition.
So this one, I only have 2 more questions and before we have to go. But I have a quick one that just piggybacks onto that. If these projects don't go through, will oil production stop in this area?
So there's current conventional production, and ERG's currently got some operations, and those can continue. This is really about if these specific future expansion projects specifically. So I imagine those existing production would continue if these get denied. ERA isn't operating at all in the county right now. They're in Kern County and Ventura County, so if they don't get this project, then you wouldn't have ERA here. But ERA was successfully sued for polluting groundwater in Kern County and for an air pollution release that sickened hundreds of people in Ventura County. So I don't know that we necessarily want to open the door to them.
So is the natural gas for steam generation obtained on the project sites?
So there is some natural gas that comes up with the oil, and that is used, but they're importing a tremendous amount of natural gas. And the natural gas that we have in California, we don't have a lot that's produced here. It's all imported, so it's fracked gas from Texas and other places in the United States that's piped in here. So you also have this long network of leaky pipes that are leaking a lot of this methane just to come all the way here, just to be used to extract more fossil fuels, more oil. It really it's crazy that this makes any kind of economic sense, and it shouldn't. It's only because companies like ERA spent millions and $40 million lobbying and such that this all makes sense. So no, there's some natural gas that's used and produced here. Most of it is, that's why there's pipelines associated with every single one of these projects. Pretty big pipelines with a lot of natural gas.
Does anybody have any comments to add at the end that you didn't have a chance to say that came up when you were talking?
Just lastly, I would just encourage everyone to become engaged, become involved. Several of the groups, our main goal here tonight was to provide information and to let you know what was coming. So tell your neighbors, tell their families, whatever side you're on, at least know what is coming, know what the impacts are, be informed, be educated, participate. You have a voice. The decision makers do listen. It's very critical when these issues come up in front of the Planning Commission, in front of the Board of Supervisors, that you voice either your opposition once you know about all of the impacts, and let them know what's important to you and what's important to your community.
Lastly, I just wanted to say not to be intimidated by these companies. Even though they have millions of dollars, we have the people power. To give you an example, in Monterey, they outspent our campaign by millions and millions of dollars, and we still won because we have a group of dedicated people that are willing to do the work to make sure that our environments stay healthy.
You brought up an excellent point. It can be very intimidating when dealing with these multi-billion-dollar companies. But we were successful 2 years ago. There was a grassroots roundup fight against Pacific Coast Energy Company for introducing a similar project to this. And in that situation, we were successful. And we were successful because we dug deep and we exposed the oil companies 10 years and 100 oil spills on their site. Not to mention, in that particular case, there were endangered plants, endangered animals that they had illegally taken and done zero mitigation. Yet they had the gall to go in front of the county and ask to expand more and double their operations. So in that situation, everyone thought it was impossible. They'd never before been able to successfully defeat an onshore oil project. Well, it is possible, and all it requires is all of us to get the information, get the facts, and make your opinions known. Thank you.
Yeah, our elected officials work for us, and so they're supposed to listen to you. So whatever you think, make sure that you include your name and address on whatever your correspondence says, and get in touch with them. Let them know what you think. And if you need help with facts, if you need help with anything at all, there's all kinds of ways to get in touch with all of us on these tables. Pick up something and get in touch. So with that, I think we're going to close. We've got to be out of here in 10 minutes. We did a great job. Thank you so much for your patience. I'd like to thank the panel. Please raise your questions and for explaining your things with us tonight.